You're about to hear one of those stories that is almost too good to be true. The self-described bushy from northwest Queensland who got to yarning with King Charles after his racehorse defied all the odds to win one of England's most prestigious horse races. Shane Stafford was a long-time stock and station agent and racing identity from Richmond who recently moved to Ireland. And he told me about a 3-year-old filly he owns called Cesene and how it sparked a conversation with the King about everything from cattle to country towns.
It's all started back at Richmond with a young girl who was a friend of ours, girlfriend, and we gave her a 90-day job for her visa. And anyhow, long story short, she ended up marrying her friend from Melbourne, and so we had to go to a wedding in Budapest because she called us her Aussie mum and dad. So anyhow, one thing led to another, and then we went on her father-in-law's yacht, which I had to cancel our flights home. Then I couldn't get a flight back home for 6 weeks, so I had to spend an extra 6 weeks in Ireland. So we got a car and I drove 8,000 k's through everywhere from Italy to Switzerland to Netherlands, Germany, and we ran out of ground to drive around, and so we decided to fly over to Ireland, and where we, did a tour of there and met the people at Coolmore Stud, and we fell in love with Ireland, and we fell in love with its people. So I've then sold our properties at Richmond in July 22 and bought two properties in Ireland, one farm at Clonmel and another property at Fettered. Our love of racing. We met people, and young Joseph O'Brien, we bought into a colt with him, and Joe Murphy, we bought into a filly, and that happened to be Cesene.
How long did it take for you to realise that Cesene was actually a pretty special horse and actually might be able to cut it in the top tier racing in England?
Well, I actually was taken to her immediately in the first start when I wasn't in the ownership, and I was particularly impressed. She came from last and run third, and I said to a friend of mine, I hadn't seen a filly sprint like that since Atlantic Jewel, and she was a champion filly. Mark Kavanagh trained in Melbourne for Coolmore, and anyhow, one thing led to another, and a friend of ours had a share in her, and he wanted to get out, so I bought in. And then her next start at Nace, she was extremely impressive and showed that turn of foot again to win impressively, and we were afforded a reasonable offer, and of which another one of the owners wanted to get out, and so I bought in again, and because I wanted Joe Murphy and young Joseph, his son, who trained the mare to keep her, because I had a high opinion of her ability, and probably more than most. But anyhow, it was nice last week to be vindicated.
So it went into the Coronation Stakes at Royal Ascot as an outsider, 33-1. So it wasn't considered one of the favoured horses leading into the race. At 33-1, did you think it was a realistic chance?
Well, I did actually, and before the Irish 1,000 Guineas, a previous race, Group 1, the best mile fillies race in Ireland, she ran third, and on the day I watched the replays of every race, and it was a rainy day, and it rained the day before, and the fence was a bit off, and she was the only filly to come up the fence all day that made ground, and she was actually the only horse all day to make ground on the fence, and she passed 3 in the last furlong. Gave me a fair bit of confidence going forward to Ascot.
Hearing from Shane Stafford here, he's speaking to us from Ireland, where Shane now lives, but for a long time he lived in northwest Queensland and had properties around Richmond, and a well-known stock and station agent and racing identity in northwest Queensland. Shane has recently relocated to Ireland, and he's had a story, a pinch yourself kind of story that's almost too good to be true. buying into a horse named Sursene that only a couple of weeks ago won a very prestigious race, the Royal Coronation Stakes at Royal Ascot. It actually became the longest price winner to ever do so at 33 to 1. And that afforded you, Shane, the opportunity to meet King Charles. Could you just explain how that came about?
Yeah, well, it's a very special moment in my life, to be honest. Our family and we're particularly fond of the Queen and the Queen Mother, and having this opportunity was one that was quite amazing, and I was staggered to to know that his favourite place in Australia, he mentioned to me, was Eidsvold, which was 30 minutes from Monto, where I spent a lot of my early life.
Your head would have been spinning because your horse has just won one of the most prestigious races. There's a huge amount going on. As you're getting the trophy, you, the jockey, the trainer, you get to say hello to the king. But how does it come up that he loves Eidsvold?
Well, I walked up onto the podium. He shook my hand and congratulated me, and I said, "I'm just a bushie from outback Australia." And I said, "I'm sure you know plenty about it. You've been over there." And that's when he raised the point of Eidsvold, and I mentioned Motto, and that I had an auntie that lived in the Eidsvold district on a property, and he asked me if I knew the Joyces, and I said, yeah, I did know them, and I'd bought a couple of bulls off them back when Maxie Macaulay was the elders representative in Eidsvold. And he said, and I said, they bred Santa Gertrudis cattle, and he said, yes, beautiful red cattle. And so he knew all about it. He said he'd been there and he'd love to have spent more time. And I said to him, well, you should do that. And he said, well, I'm just too busy. But I'd love to, yeah.
What was your read on the king?
Totally impressed with the man. He was absolutely easy to talk to. I could sit down and have a conversation with him very easily.
What was the bigger high that day, winning the Coronation Stakes with Sursene or having a chat with the king?
Well, I'd have to say they were on a high, both of them. But the 110 to 1 that we took before the Irish 1,000 guineas, that was up with it as well.
So you got on it at 110 to 1 for the Coronation Stakes before it had actually run in the Irish Guineas, which was the immediate race prior to the stakes. Wow, Shane, so you might be able to buy another property in Ireland.
Well, I only said yesterday, I've just bought a new car and she's paid for that, and I said the way she's going, she might pay for the farm too with a bit of luck.
Just for listeners that aren't familiar with the importance of the Coronation Stakes, this is a race that's been going since the 1840s. It's got a very long history, but in the racing landscape in Europe, what does it mean to win this race?
Well, it hadn't hit me until Saturday, and I went and stood on my own up at the top of the grandstand and watched the parade as the Royals come down the straight, and with the beautiful horses, and when the Royal anthem started to play, the realisation sort of shook me, and I was could feel an emotional buzz all through me, and realising that it was the 200th anniversary of that particular auspicious race meeting, and the enormity and the accomplishment, that Sursene had afforded us was very humbling. We've won Camberwell Cups and, Richmond bracelets and Maxwellton bracelets. They're all good to win, but I guess this is a special one.
Have you been receiving many well wishes from your mates in northwest Queensland, Shane? People you knew through your time in Richmond?
Absolutely. People have been wonderful. I've been trying to answer everybody I can. I don't think I slept nearly for 4 days answering them, and even our staff here in Ireland, I think every one of them was on it, and and being a a local win at Fedded, and Joe Murphy being such a wonderful gentleman and recognised as such, you know, it's been announced at Mass, Sunday, you know, weddings. You know, yeah, it's a pretty huge occasion.
So
Yeah,
they're bringing it up the priests, are they, in mass? Thank goodness for Ceseno winning the, the coronation stakes. It's not just a big deal for you. The trainer you mentioned, who may not be, our audience may not be familiar with, is a very lovable man in Ireland, and he had not actually won this race before.
absolutely. It was his first Group One winner after being a trainer for 50 years. So, and his jockeys rode for him since he was a little apprentice, and it was his first Group One, and it was my first Group One.
Well, Shane Stafford, if someone had in 2021 told you that this was all ahead of you, you probably wouldn't have believed it. It wasn't really even on the bingo cards when you were living in Richmond before you sold the properties and moved to Ireland. Do you have to pinch yourself?
It certainly do, and yeah, no, it's an extremely humbling experience, and one I'm going to treasure and just let it sink in.